When my girlfriend told me she was pregnant, I immediately proposed because I wanted to do the right thing. We need to get married before I start showing, she insisted, so we planned everything in 6 weeks. During the ceremony, her ex-boyfriend crashed the wedding screaming, "That's my baby she's carrying." When she broke down sobbing, she confessed everything. "The pregnancy isn't yours. I needed you to marry me before you found out the truth." My name is Lucas, and I work as a veterinarian at the Riverside Animal Hospital in Portland, Oregon. I've always been the kind of person who tries to do the right thing, who believes in taking responsibility for my actions, and who trusts people when they tell me they love me. Those qualities, which I'd always considered strengths, turned out to be exactly what made me vulnerable to the most elaborate deception of my life. I met Isabella Morrison 2 years ago when she brought her sick cat, Whiskers, to our emergency clinic on a Sunday night. She was crying when she arrived, clearly distraught about her pet's condition, and I stayed late to perform the surgery that saved Whiskers' life. Isabella was so grateful that she asked if she could take me to dinner to thank me properly. I was attracted to her immediately. She had this warmth and genuine kindness that drew me in, plus she was beautiful with auburn hair and green eyes that seemed to see straight through me. Our first date was at a small Italian restaurant in the Pearl District, and we talked for hours about everything from veterinary medicine to her work as a marketing coordinator for a nonprofit that helped homeless animals. The connection felt natural and easy, like we'd known each other for years instead of days. Isabella seemed genuinely fascinated by my work and asked thoughtful questions about animal behavior and veterinary procedures. "I've always admired people who dedicate their lives to helping creatures that can't speak for themselves," she said over dessert. "It takes a special kind of person to choose that path." I was completely smitten. Here was someone beautiful, intelligent, and compassionate who understood and appreciated what I did for a living. We started dating exclusively within a month, and I quickly learned that Isabella had a way of making me feel like the most important person in the world. She would surprise me with lunch at the clinic, attend veterinary conferences with me, and even volunteer at the animal shelter where I donated my time on weekends. Isabella's background was somewhat complicated, which should have been a red flag, but at the time I interpreted it as evidence of her resilience and strength. She'd grown up in foster care after her parents died in a car accident when she was 12. She'd aged out of the system at 18 and put herself through college while working multiple jobs. She'd had a few serious relationships that hadn't worked out, including one with a guy named Connor Walsh who she described as emotionally unavailable and commitment phobic. Connor was never willing to take our relationship seriously, she told me one evening as we walked through Laurelhurst Park. He'd talk about the future in vague terms but never wanted to make actual plans. After 3 years, I realized he was never going to be ready for marriage or family, so I ended it. Their breakup had been about 8 months before we met, and Isabella seemed to have processed it well. She spoke about Connor without bitterness, just disappointment that someone she loved hadn't been able to give her the commitment she wanted. "I'm at a point in my life where I know what I want," she said, squeezing my hand. "I want a partner who's ready to build something real together. Someone who shares my values and my vision for the future." That conversation was one of many where Isabella and I discussed our goals and timeline for the relationship. We both wanted marriage and children eventually, though we agreed we weren't in any rush. I was 29 and focused on building my veterinary practice, while Isabella at 27 was working toward a promotion at her nonprofit. We talked about waiting a few years before getting engaged, maybe moving in together first, taking time to really get to know each other. "There's no need to rush anything," I remember saying. "We have all the time in the world to figure out our future together." Isabella agreed completely. "I love that we're both mature enough to take things slow and do this right," she said. For 18 months, our relationship progressed steadily and naturally. We spent holidays with each other's chosen families. I introduced her to my parents and younger sister Maya in Seattle, and she introduced me to the foster family that had taken her in during high school and remained close to her afterward. We took weekend trips to the coast, attended each other's work events, and settled into a comfortable routine of spending most nights together while maintaining our separate apartments. Isabella fit seamlessly into my life. She got along wonderfully with my colleagues at the animal hospital, particularly my partner Dr. Jennifer Santos and our head veterinary technician, Rosa Martinez. She'd often stop by the clinic after work just to say hello and would bring coffee and pastries for the entire staff on busy days. "You found a good one," Dr. Santos told me regularly. "Isabella's got that rare combination of kindness and strength. She's going to make an excellent partner for someone in our field." Rosa was equally impressed. "I've seen a lot of veterinarians' girlfriends come and go," she said. "Most of them can't handle the long hours, the emergency calls, the emotional toll of this work. Isabella seems to really understand what you do and why it matters." The only occasional tension in our relationship came from Isabella's desire for more concrete plans about our future. Every few months, she'd bring up engagement timelines or ask when I thought we might start looking at rings. I'd always reassure her that I was serious about our relationship and that marriage was definitely in our future, but I wanted to wait until I'd finished paying off my veterinary school loans and had more financial stability. "I'm not going anywhere," I'd tell her. "We have our whole lives together. I just want to be in a position to give you the wedding and the life you deserve." Isabella would always accept my reasoning gracefully, but I could tell she was sometimes frustrated by my practical approach to major life decisions. She was more spontaneous and emotional, while I tended to be methodical and cautious about big changes. Looking back, I can see how perfectly this dynamic set me up for what happened next. The pregnancy announcement came on a Thursday evening in February. I just finished a particularly difficult day at the clinic. We'd had to euthanize an elderly dog whose cancer had progressed beyond treatment, and I was emotionally drained when I got home to Isabella's apartment. She'd made my favorite dinner and seemed unusually excited about something, which I attributed to her natural empathy and desire to cheer me up after a hard day. "I have something to tell you," she said as we sat down to eat. "Something that's going to change everything for us." I assumed she was talking about a promotion at work or maybe a vacation she wanted to plan. Instead, she pulled out a pregnancy test and set it on the table next to my plate. "I'm pregnant, Lucas," she said, her eyes filling with tears. "We're going to have a baby." The shock was immediate and overwhelming. We'd been careful about birth control, using condoms consistently because Isabella had said hormonal birth control didn't agree with her body. The possibility of pregnancy had always felt remote and theoretical, something we'd deal with in the future when we were married and financially ready. "Are you sure?" I asked, staring at the positive test. "Have you seen a doctor?" "I took 3 different tests," Isabella said. "All positive. And I've been feeling nauseous for the past week, which is what made me think to test in the first place. I have an appointment with my gynecologist tomorrow to confirm everything." My mind was racing, trying to process this information and figure out what it meant for our carefully planned timeline. A baby changed everything: our living situation, our finances, our career priorities, our entire future together. "How do you feel about this?" I asked Isabella, reaching across the table to take her hand. "Scared," she admitted. "But also excited. I know this isn't how we plan things, but maybe this is the universe telling us we're ready." We talked for hours that night about what this pregnancy meant and what we wanted to do. Isabella was clear that she wanted to keep the baby and that she hoped I'd want to be involved as a father. I assured her that of course I wanted to be involved, this was my child, and I would step up and take responsibility. "I think we should get married," I said sometime around midnight. "I don't want our child to be born to unmarried parents. I want us to be a family." Isabella started crying again, but this time they were happy tears. "Are you proposing to me?" "I'm saying that I love you and I want to marry you," I said. "This pregnancy just moved up our timeline, but it doesn't change how I feel about you or our future together." The next morning, I called my parents to tell them about the pregnancy and our decision to get married. They were surprised but supportive, though my mother did express some concern about the rushed timeline. "Are you sure you're ready for this, Lucas?" she asked during our phone conversation. "Marriage and parenthood are huge commitments, and you've only been together for 18 months. "I love Isabella, Mom," I said. "And this is my child. I want to do the right thing." "The right thing isn't always getting married just because of a pregnancy," my mother said gently. "You can be a wonderful father without rushing into marriage." But I'd already made up my mind. I believed that children deserved married parents who were committed to building a life together. I wanted my son or daughter to grow up in a stable, traditional family structure. Isabella's doctor confirmed the pregnancy and estimated that she was about 6 weeks along, which meant the baby would be born in early October. Isabella immediately started talking about wedding timelines and expressed urgency about getting married quickly. "I want to be married before I start showing," she said. "I don't want to be a pregnant bride walking down the aisle with everyone counting months and making assumptions." Her concern seemed reasonable and considerate. A spring wedding would allow us to be married while she was still in her first trimester, avoiding any potential gossip or judgment from family and friends. "Plus," Isabella added, "I want our baby to be born to married parents. That's important to me for a lot of reasons." We decided on a 6-week timeline for the wedding, which meant planning everything for the first weekend in April. It was an incredibly compressed schedule, but Isabella threw herself into the organization with an energy and efficiency that impressed everyone around her. She found a venue, booked a photographer, ordered flowers, and coordinated all the details with a precision that made the impossible timeline seem manageable. "Isabella's like a wedding planning machine," my sister Maya observed when she came down from Seattle to help with preparations. "I've never seen anyone organize something this complicated so quickly." The rapid pace of wedding planning meant that I was mostly focused on the logistics rather than processing the emotional reality of what was happening. Between my full-time work at the clinic and helping with wedding preparations, I didn't have much time to think deeply about how dramatically my life was changing. Looking back, I realized this was probably intentional on Isabella's part. By keeping me busy and focused on practical tasks, she prevented me from asking too many questions or having second thoughts about the rushed timeline. There were a few moments during those 6 weeks when I felt uneasy about something, though I couldn't quite identify what was bothering me. Isabella seemed different somehow, more anxious and controlling than she'd been before. She was very specific about certain wedding details in ways that seemed unusual for someone who'd never expressed strong opinions about weddings before. For example, she insisted that we have a small, intimate ceremony with only immediate family and a few close friends. When I suggested inviting some of my colleagues from the clinic or some of her friends from work, she said she wanted to keep things simple and private. "With such a short timeline, it's easier to keep the guest list small," she explained. "We can always have a bigger celebration later." She also seemed unusually concerned about the timing of various wedding events. She wanted the ceremony to start exactly at 4 p.m. and wanted to make sure we'd have time for all the photos before sunset. When the photographer suggested a slightly different schedule, Isabella became almost agitated in her insistence that we stick to her original timeline. Everything needs to happen exactly as planned, she told me when I suggested we could be more flexible with the timing. I've worked too hard organizing this to have things fall apart because we were careless about scheduling. The pregnancy symptoms Isabella had mentioned initially seemed to disappear after the first few weeks. When I asked her about it, she said she was one of the lucky women who only experienced morning sickness briefly in the first trimester. My foster mother told me she was the same way with her pregnancies, Isabella explained. Some women just have an easier time than others. I accepted this explanation because I didn't know much about pregnancy symptoms and because Isabella seemed to be handling everything so well. She was still working full-time, still planning our wedding, still maintaining her normal activity level without any apparent fatigue or discomfort. The only time I saw her doctor appointment results was when she showed me an ultrasound photo that confirmed the pregnancy. The image was grainy and difficult to interpret, but Isabella pointed out what she said was the baby's outline and told me everything looked healthy and normal. The doctor said we're right on track for an October due date, she said, holding the ultrasound photo against her still flat stomach. Our little one is growing perfectly. 2 weeks before the wedding, I had an unexpected encounter that should have alerted me to potential problems, but I dismissed it at the time. I was picking up lunch from a restaurant near Isabella's office when I ran into Connor Walsh, her ex-boyfriend. I recognized him from photos Isabella had shown me, and he apparently recognized me as well. "You must be Lucas," he said, approaching my table. "Isabella's new boyfriend." "Fiancé, actually," I corrected. "We're getting married in 2 weeks." Connor's expression shifted to something I couldn't quite read. Surprise, maybe, or confusion. "Married? That's fast. How long have you two been together?" "About 18 months, I said, wondering why he was asking and why the conversation felt slightly uncomfortable. "Congratulations," Connor said, but his tone didn't match the sentiment. "I hope everything works out well for you both." There was something in his manner that bothered me, but I couldn't identify exactly what it was. He seemed to know something that I didn't, or to be holding back information that he considered relevant. But when I mentioned the encounter to Isabella that evening, she dismissed it completely. "Connor's probably just surprised that I moved on so quickly," she said. "He always assumed I'd be waiting around for him indefinitely. It probably bothers him to know that I found someone better." Her explanation made sense, and I didn't think about the encounter again until much later. The week of the wedding, Isabella seemed increasingly nervous and emotional. She'd cry at unexpected moments, claim she felt overwhelmed by all the planning, and express fears that something would go wrong with the ceremony. "What if it rains?" she asked repeatedly, even though the weather forecast showed clear skies. "What if the flowers aren't right? What if the photographer doesn't show up?" I attributed her anxiety to normal pre-wedding nerves combined with pregnancy hormones. Dr. Santos had warned me that pregnancy could make women more emotional and sensitive, so I tried to be extra patient and supportive. "Everything's going to be perfect," I'd reassure Isabella whenever she started spiraling into worry. "And even if something goes wrong, the important thing is that we'll be married at the end of the day." The morning of the wedding, Isabella seemed calmer and more focused. She'd arranged to get ready at her apartment with help from her foster sister, while I got ready at my place with my groomsman, my childhood friend Tyler Brennan. The ceremony was scheduled for 4 p.m. at a small wedding venue in the Columbia River Gorge, followed by dinner for our 24 guests at a nearby restaurant. "You ready for this, man?" Tyler asked as he helped me with my tie. "Married life, fatherhood, the whole package?" "I'm ready," I said, and I meant it. Despite the rushed timeline and the unexpected circumstances, I felt confident about marrying Isabella and starting our family together. She was kind, intelligent, and shared my values about building a life centered on helping others. Our child would be lucky to have her as a mother. The wedding venue was beautiful, a restored farmhouse with gardens overlooking the Columbia River. Isabella had chosen spring flowers in white and pale yellow, and everything looked exactly as she'd envisioned. Our families and friends began arriving around 3:30, and I spent time greeting everyone and taking pre-ceremony photos with Tyler and my family. Isabella looked stunning when she arrived with her foster family. She'd chosen a simple but elegant dress that didn't reveal any sign of pregnancy, and she'd styled her hair in loose waves with small white flowers woven through it. When she walked down the aisle toward me at exactly 4 p.m., I felt overwhelmed with love and gratitude that this amazing woman had chosen to build a life with me. The ceremony began with readings from both our families and personal vows that Isabella and I had written for each other. I spoke about how Isabella had brought joy and purpose into my life, how I admired her strength and compassion, and how excited I was to raise our child together and build a family based on love and mutual respect. Isabella's vows were beautiful and emotional. She talked about how I'd shown her what it meant to be truly loved and supported, how she'd never felt safer or more valued than she did with me, and how she couldn't wait to see me become a father to our baby. "You've given me everything I've ever wanted," she said, tears streaming down her face. "A partner who loves me unconditionally, a future I can count on, and now a family of our own. I promise to spend the rest of my life being worthy of the love you've given me." The officiant was just asking for the rings when we heard shouting from the back of the ceremony space. "Stop. You can't marry her." Everyone turned to see a man in a rumpled suit running toward the altar. It was Connor Walsh, Isabella's ex-boyfriend, and he looked desperate and determined. Connor? Isabella gasped, her face going white. What are you doing here? That's my baby she's carrying, Connor shouted, loud enough for all our guests to hear. Isabella, you can't do this to him. You can't marry him when you know that's my child. The silence that followed was deafening. I looked at Isabella, expecting to see confusion or outrage at Connor's obviously mistaken claim. Instead, I saw guilt and terror. Isabella, I said quietly, what is he talking about? She opened her mouth but no words came out. Connor, meanwhile, continued his devastating revelation. She's been lying to you, he said, addressing me directly while our families and friends watched in shocked silence. We were together in December. She got pregnant and tried to get me to marry her, but I told her I wasn't ready. She said she understood, but then she disappeared and stopped taking my calls. He pulled out his phone and showed it to the crowd. I've been trying to reach her for weeks because I found out about this wedding and realized what she was doing. She's using you to give her the marriage and stability I couldn't provide, but that baby is mine. I felt like the world had stopped spinning. Everything around me became surreal and distant, like I was watching this happen to someone else. The beautiful flowers, the carefully planned ceremony, the faces of our guests, it all felt like a movie set that was about to collapse. Isabella, I said again, my voice barely above a whisper. Is this true? She finally found her voice, but instead of immediately denying Connor's claims, she started crying. Lucas, I can explain. It's not what you think. It's complicated. That's when I knew. The guilt on her face, the way she was looking at Connor, the fact that she wasn't immediately and emphatically denying his claims, it was all true. The pregnancy wasn't mine. Our rushed wedding wasn't about doing the right thing for our child. It was about covering up a lie. How long? I asked, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. How long have you known the baby wasn't mine? Isabella's sobs became louder. Since the beginning, she whispered. I've known since the beginning. The impact of her confession hit me like a physical blow. The pregnancy announcement, the rushed timeline, the urgency about getting married before she started showing, it had all been a carefully orchestrated deception designed to trap me into marriage before I could discover the truth. I looked out at our guests, these people who had taken time out of their lives to celebrate what they thought was a joyful beginning to my marriage and family. My parents looked shocked and heartbroken. My sister was covering her mouth in horror. Isabella's foster family seemed confused and embarrassed. Ladies and gentlemen, I announced, my voice carrying across the garden, I think we can all agree that this wedding is over. Thank you for coming, and I apologize for wasting your time. People began murmuring among themselves and gathering their things. Some of my closer friends approached to offer support, but I waved them away. I needed to process what had just happened, and I needed to get away from Isabella before I said something I'd regret. Isabella tried to approach me as the crowd dispersed, but I held up my hand to stop her. Don't, I said. Just don't. You've said enough. Lucas, please, she begged, reaching for my arm. Let me explain. I love you. I want to be with you. The paternity doesn't change that. It changes everything, I replied. You built our entire relationship on a lie. You used me to solve a problem that Connor created. I started walking toward the parking area, desperate to get away from the scene of my humiliation. But as I passed Connor, something made me stop. Why did you wait until now? I asked him. Why didn't you tell me sooner? Connor looked genuinely remorseful. I didn't know how to reach you, he said. Isabella blocked my number and wouldn't respond to my messages. I only found out about the wedding because a mutual friend mentioned it. I tried calling the venue yesterday, but they said they couldn't give out personal information about guests. He took a deep breath. I know this is terrible timing, but I couldn't let her do this to you. You deserve to know the truth before you legally bind yourself to someone who's been lying to you. And you want to be involved with the baby? I asked. I want to do the right thing, Connor said. I was scared when Isabella first told me she was pregnant, but I've had time to think about it. I want to be a father to my child. I want to take responsibility. I nodded and walked away, leaving Connor and Isabella to figure out their own situation. I had no role in their drama anymore. The drive home was a blur. I went straight to my apartment and sat on my couch, still wearing my wedding suit, trying to understand how completely I'd been deceived. Isabella hadn't just lied about the pregnancy, she'd constructed an elaborate fiction designed to manipulate me into marriage before I could discover the truth. The next morning, Isabella showed up at my apartment. I'd been expecting her, but I wasn't ready to talk. I was still processing the full scope of her deception and trying to figure out what I was going to do next. Lucas, please let me explain, Isabella said when I opened the door. Explain what? I asked, stepping aside to let her in. Explain how you've been lying to me for months? Explain how you used my desire to do the right thing to manipulate me into marriage? Explain how you were willing to let me raise another man's child without my knowledge? Isabella sat down on my couch and put her head in her hands. I was scared, she said. When Connor told me he wasn't ready for marriage or fatherhood, I panicked. I didn't know what I was going to do. So you decided to trick me into thinking the baby was mine, I said. I didn't plan it that way, Isabella protested. But when you were so immediately supportive and willing to step up, I realized you'd be a better father than Connor ever would be. You're stable, responsible, caring. You would have given our child everything Connor couldn't. It's not our child, I said firmly. It's your child with Connor. I have no claim to that baby, and that baby has no claim to me. But you could, Isabella said desperately. We could still get married. We could raise the baby together. You said you wanted to be a father, and I could give you that chance. I wanted to be a father to my own child, I said. Not to someone else's child through deception and manipulation. Isabella started crying again. I love you, Lucas. That was never a lie. Everything I felt for you, everything I said about our future together, that was all real. If you loved me, you wouldn't have lied to me for months, I said. If you loved me, you would have told me the truth and let me make my own decisions about our relationship. I was afraid you'd leave me, Isabella admitted. I was afraid that if you knew the baby wasn't yours, you wouldn't want to be with me anymore. So instead you decided to base our marriage on a fundamental lie, I said. You decided to let me believe I was going to be a father when you knew I wasn't. You decided to manipulate my feelings and my values to get what you wanted. Isabella didn't deny any of it. I need you to leave, I said. I need time to process all of this, and I can't do that with you here. Will you call me? Isabella asked as she stood up. When you've had time to think about everything. I don't know, I said honestly. Right now, I can't imagine wanting to speak to you again. Isabella left, and I spent the next several days trying to piece together the full extent of her deception. I realized that virtually every aspect of the pregnancy had been carefully managed to prevent me from discovering the truth. The disappearing morning sickness, the limited doctor visits, the reluctance to involve me in medical appointments, it all made sense now. I also realized that Isabella had been managing Connor's attempts to contact her throughout our relationship. The timeline of their breakup, which she'd told me happened 8 months before we met, was completely fabricated. They'd actually been together until December, which was only 2 months before the pregnancy announcement. The most painful realization was understanding how thoroughly Isabella had studied my character and values to construct a manipulation that would be most effective with me specifically. She'd known that my desire to do the right thing and my commitment to taking responsibility would make me immediately propose when faced with an unexpected pregnancy. She'd counted on my practical nature and my respect for traditional family structures to rush me into marriage before I could ask too many questions. In the weeks that followed, I learned through mutual acquaintances that Isabella and Connor were attempting to work things out. They'd started couples counseling and were trying to figure out how to co-parent their child. Connor, to his credit, had stepped up and was taking responsibility for his role in the situation. Isabella tried to contact me several times during this period, sending long emails explaining her actions and begging for another chance. She claimed that her feelings for me had been genuine and that she'd only lied about the paternity because she'd been scared and confused. She offered to continue our relationship even though Connor was now involved as the baby's father. I never responded to her messages. There was nothing left to say. She'd shown me exactly who she was, someone willing to manipulate and deceive the people who loved her to get what she wanted. That wasn't someone I could trust with my heart or my future. 6 months later, I've rebuilt my life in ways I never expected. The experience taught me valuable lessons about trusting my instincts and asking difficult questions, even when I'm uncomfortable with potential answers. I've learned to distinguish between wanting to help someone and being manipulated by someone who's taking advantage of my helpful nature. I've started dating again, slowly and carefully, but with a much clearer understanding of what I'm looking for in a partner. I want someone who shares my values about honesty and communication, someone who sees me as a partner rather than a solution to their problems. The hardest part of the whole experience was realizing how completely I'd been fooled. Isabella had convinced me that she loved me while simultaneously planning an elaborate deception. She'd made me feel valued and appreciated while using my best qualities against me. But I've also learned that being deceived doesn't make me naive or stupid. It makes me human. Isabella was skilled at manipulation because she'd had practice. I wasn't her first target, and I probably wasn't her last. The fact that I trusted someone who claimed to love me says something positive about my character, not something negative. Most importantly, I've learned that sometimes the worst betrayals are also the biggest blessings in disguise. Discovering Isabella's deception before we were legally married saved me from years of living a lie. Finding out about her willingness to manipulate and deceive protected me from building a life with someone who fundamentally didn't respect me. The wedding that was supposed to be the beginning of my happily ever after turned out to be the end of my willingness to accept love without questioning its authenticity. And in the end, that was a much more valuable lesson than marriage to someone who viewed me as a means to an end would have been. I heard recently that Isabella and Connor got married in a small ceremony shortly after their daughter was born. I wish them well and hope they've both learned something from the chaos they created. But I'm grateful that their daughter will grow up with her actual biological parents instead of being raised in a household built on deception. As for me, I'm focusing on my work, my relationships with family and friends, and building a life based on authentic connections rather than convenient arrangements. When I do find someone to share my life with, it will be because we genuinely choose each other, not because circumstances or deception forced us together. Sometimes the most important word you can learn to say is no. No to relationships that don't feel right, no to timelines that seem rushed, and no to people who ask you to ignore your instincts in favor of their version of reality. Isabella taught me that lesson the hard way, but it's a lesson I'll carry with me for the rest of my life. And for that, in a strange way, I'm actually grateful.